Hello again, everybody. I'm Jeremiah Ronner, and thank you for listening in to a brand new episode of Deeply Rooted.
Deeply rooted in God's word. Deeply rooted in God's word.
Hello and welcome again, everybody, to another episode of Deeply Rooted. I'm Jeremiah Ronner, as always, your host. Thank you so much for joining us, wherever you're at and however you may be listening. We appreciate you tuning in with us. As always, don't forget, check us out on our Facebook page. You can follow us there, as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also find our content on Apple Podcast. So if you missed any of the previous episodes and like to go back and check those out, make sure you do that. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us on our email there. You'll find that at the bottom in the description link in our YouTube and Apple Podcast bio. We're excited today for a really good interview. A good friend of mine, Pastor Andy Barnes. Andy's the lead pastor of First Baptist Church in Gate City. He's married to his lovely wife, Marsha. They've got 4 children. Andy and his wife have been serving the church here at Gate City and the community very faithfully for many years now. So, Andy, thank you so much for being a part of what we're doing.
My pleasure.
All right, I want to go back a little bit and get your bio for just a second. Read where you grew up in Northeast Tennessee. So talk to us a little bit about your upbringing and some of the memories you have from that.
Well, I'm a Gray guy. I'm from over in Gray and grew up there, went to Gray Elementary School, then over to Boones Creek Middle and Junior High, and then from there to Daniel Boone High School. So Gray was where I started, grew up just a stone's throw from the fairgrounds. And so back in the day, that was my playground. My uncle was the president of the Appalachian Fair, and I felt like as a boy that the whole world came to my back door 1 week a year. And so, really enjoyed my childhood back in the day when you didn't lock doors and everybody knew each other.
Right.
And so had a cousin and several other friends on my block, and so we had a big time together. I have very fond memories of my childhood.
Did you play a lot of sports growing up? Because I know athletics are a pretty big part of your background.
I did. I was the 3-sport guy for a while, basketball, baseball, and football, and just a sports junkie. Sports has been a big part of my life and still is. And so I grew up playing in the youth leagues. My dad helped coach. I had an uncle that was a coach and a cousin that was on the team. And so we grew up in the youth leagues, and then from there on to junior high ball, and then was able to play in high school and enjoyed that.
Now, what about local church? Did that bring any memories back to you when we talk about that? Did you have a big part in church growing up?
Yeah, I had good folks, and they certainly were part of the local church. We attended Gray United Methodist, and that church was a big part of my upbringing, and my parents were active there, and so all of us children, we were off to church with our parents, and I ended up serving in that church through school, some voluntary positions, and some actually, I remember one summer I worked as a assistant youth director when I was in high school. So church was a big part of my life.
Now, you led into something I was going to talk about next. You mentioned being a part of ministry at a young age. Would you describe your calling, I guess, to ministry sometime around middle school, high school, or was that maybe later on in your life?
Jeremiah, it's really interesting. Looking back on it, and sometimes we understand, I think, our call in hindsight as well as we do in the moment or,
right.
or in looking, ahead. I had a really interesting relationship with God in that I think I was called at a very early age, but for whatever reasons, resisted that or wasn't aware of it. I can remember growing up, it was kind of one of those things that, they would say about me. They didn't know if they'd find me at the end of the bar or the foot of the cross, because I was the guy that got into a lot of things, but I was also the guy that stayed very close to talking to God because I didn't get by with those things. And so that's a very interesting thing. That call, God was precious to keep His hand on me and to hold me and to solidify that call through the years.
How old were you when you really got into, really sunk your teeth into ministry?
Well, I would say, in a way that was very committed, and I think a lot of us have this testimony. My wife was a big influence. She did her student teaching at the high school where I was a teacher. I was a teacher and an assistant basketball coach at Daniel Boone High School and assisted Bobby Snyder, who was somewhat of a legend around here in basketball. And Marsha Coward at the time, all-time leading scorer at East Tennessee State University, basketball phenom. I knew about her, but I didn't know her. She ends up at Daniel Boone High School to do her student teaching. And when she came to do her student teaching there, we became friends. And I remember how drawn I was to her regarding her commitment to Jesus, because I would see her pray at the table whenever, she would be getting ready to have a meal at lunch. And anytime I would talk to her, eventually the conversation would get around to her relationship with the Lord, and I would talk to her about mine. And so I think I took that next step whenever the Lord called Marsha and me together, because it wasn't too long after that we were married. And when He called us together, we were pretty much in full-time ministry, although it might not have looked like that from the standpoint of the package, from pretty much from the beginning of our marriage.
Now, was that received pretty well by family and friends? I assume it probably was.
It was. There were some things that that family didn't fully understand. When it came time to have children, we had certain things that we felt strongly about regarding our kids, relative to educating them in a Christian worldview, and some of the things that we were fine if they did, and some of the things that we weren't. And I think sometimes grandparents don't fully understand that. But our call and our commitment to God was very well received. I married a preacher's kid, so Marsha's dad was a pastor in Charlotte at the time that we met, and he became my spiritual mentor after I got into the family. I never really had one of those of such, but I, especially looking back on it now, know that God gave me David Coward as a spiritual mentor.
Now, you mentioned how Marsha and you met. What year was that you all got married?
We got married in 1984, and got married in Charlotte. And I can remember, that long-distance wedding for me. Marsha's side of the church full. Mine had a spattering because it was about, 4 hours away. But we were married in 84, had our first child in 88.
Did you all continue into education, or did that kind of branch you all out into full-time ministry at that point?
Well, that's an interesting ride. We've done several things. When we got married, I was the coach at Boone, but we decided to move back to Charlotte and just be closer to her folks. And so I found myself in a sales position, and she found herself in corporate America. Both of us were. And that lasted about a year. And we came back, and Marsha actually became the head basketball coach at Dobbins Bennett High School for the girls program. And I went to work with Mike Williams, who was at Unicoi County at the time. So Marsha coaching at DB, I was at Unicoi County. And while we were doing that, Susan Yao got the head coaching job at Drake University. Marsha had played for her at East Tennessee State. So Susan asked us if we would go to Drake with her, and so I went as a assistant coach. Marsha did too, and we coached with Susan before eventually taking some other coaching positions. So we actually came into ministry through the coaching door. Obviously, I think anytime you have a team, you have, just kind of a unit of people that you're sowing your life into. And if we can keep our eye off the scoreboard long enough to know that there's a bigger score, then we have a great opportunity to minister to people. And so that was kind of our training ground of ministry. And then from there into the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and some other things that were obviously more, obvious ministry kind of opportunities. But that's sort of the route that it took.
Yeah. So y'all had great success, through your marriage there and being able to minister together. Now, we talked earlier about when I let in, you had 4 children. So what did that do to your all's ministry dynamic, and how did that change things for you all?
Well, by the time we had Andrew, he was born when we were in Lexington, and I was an assistant coach at the University of Kentucky with their women's program. So Andrew was our first, and for us, we wanted to homeschool our kids. I'm not saying anyone who didn't make just as good a choice as we did. We were just following the leading of the Lord, and so our first ministry was at home, and so we began to. After they became school age, Andrew and then 2 sisters and then John Reed, we homeschooled each of them for a period of time. And so our first ministry was at home. And in addition to later opportunities that we have, we kind of cut our ministry teeth on our kids. And looking back on it, I wouldn't have it any other way because, I think that our first ministry is at home.
Right.
And so I think having kids really enhanced our ministry because it was our first congregation, if you will.
Now, anybody that's ever coached or been involved in education would understand what I'm saying here. And obviously you have your family at home, but being around young people for that long and for that amount of time, you develop almost like a second family with these people, and you develop huge relationships that last a long time. What did coaching and being involved in athletics teach you about ministry and your own spiritual life?
Well, if I go back to the very beginning of my coaching, and again, this is a lot hindsight, but as I look at that and God redeems everything, I understand how selfish I was early as a coach. Because it was all about winning. It was all about the team looking well enough coached to where I looked like that I was a good coach.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I've been able to help John Reed with that now because he's in coaching.
Right.
And he'll occasionally ask me, some of the pitfalls, and I tell him that's one of them. But then as I began to mature in coaching, and as I learned more to listen to God, and to the voice of the Holy Spirit, I was actually just able to see just what you're talking about, how you have this group of people and you have such an opportunity to sow into their lives. And it's not cliche, it's true. Athletics is kind of a picture of life. You win some, you lose some, you have good games, you have bad games, you stumble and you fall, you have enormous victories. And so to walk through all of those dynamics with players and then be able to equate those to the walk of life, the kingdom of God, the reality of Jesus, and the fact that He is ultimately the friend that sticks closer than a brother and leads us through all of those different areas. That was, I look back on it as a very significant thing.
Now, I'm going to hit a little bit of personal background here. I think probably the first time that I had heard your name and Marsha's name when I was younger was through a ministry called FCA. And for people that are listening and are familiar with that, we're talking about Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Can you unpack a little bit about how you all got involved in that and what role you've been involved in some capacity there?
Yeah, I eventually became, my last coaching job, and it was the only head coaching job that I had, I was always an assistant. I became the head men's basketball coach at a college called Truett McConnell College in Northeast Georgia, in Cleveland, Georgia. And while I was there, I have a friend, David Sims, who was with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And Dave, even though from the Tri-Cities area, was serving in Florida. And Dave just called me up one day, and he had no idea that I was thinking about getting out of coaching and all that. And he just told me, he said, he always called me Ange. And he said, Ange, he said, your hometown area is open with Fellowship of Christian Athletes. He said, would you be interested in coming and working for FCA in full-time ministry, because it'd be a jump start because you already know so many people,
right?
And I told him that I would. And so, long story short, without going into all the details, I ended up back in the Tri-Cities in the 90s with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes as an area director. And it was just a great fit. As a matter of fact, I almost felt guilty for being paid, because here I was sharing Jesus, which I would do anyway, with coaches whom I love to be around. And it was just such a great fit. You had to raise your own funds, so that was a little bit of a challenge. And so it was really a great first step into what I now call full-time ministry.
Now, how did Marsha and the kids receive that?
Well, Marsha was good with it, and at that time, coaching was beginning to be something that we had been talking about not wanting to do that much longer. But hindsight too, that's part of the call of God, right, too. He begins to, I think, grace wanes for one area so that it kind of increases for another. And so Marsha was a perfect fit, even though I was the one technically being paid. Marsha had ministry to women's athletes and women's coaches, like I did to men's athletes and men's coaches. So it just expanded the ministry.
Now, any point in time during that kind of transition a little bit more into the ministry aspect, did you pursue any Christian education during that time, or maybe later on?
No, I'm an English major with a degree from East Tennessee State. I have some hours beyond the bachelor's in English. I have taken some classes on my own through different opportunities, but I came into ministry without a educational ministry background, and actually came into pastoring without that as well, because my first pastorate was in a non-denominational church, which that wasn't a real requirement. And so, now 24 years into pastoral ministry, I am not seminary trained, I'm not Bible college trained. I'm an English major and a former coach, and I find myself as a pastor.
Right.
Didn't even know that was possible, quite honestly.
Well, I'm a living testimony of myself, so we got something in common there. But looking back on that, you mentioned the pastorate. When was that the first one that you took?
The first pastorate was a church called New Life Church of Charlotte. As I mentioned, a non-denominational church. I came straight from FCA into that. My father-in-law, my spiritual mentor, pastored that church. And he had just learned that he had prostate cancer. Oh. And he was getting ready to step away. And he asked me if I would be interested in pastoring that church. Now, I have an interesting story, if I could share regarding that, just to show you how God speaks and how the gifts of the Spirit work. But during a time that I was considering that, but yet not sure whether I wanted to stay with FCA, should I pastor, I went to a home group meeting. Marsha was going to it. She knew some people there. We were living in Gray at the time. And I didn't know anybody at the home group meetings. As a matter of fact, I didn't want to go because it was March Madness and there were some games that I wanted to see. Right. And I said, well, you just go and I'll stay home. But as she was backing out of the driveway, I felt very strongly, and I think we all know what we mean when we say that, when God speaks to us. I felt very strongly that I was to get in the car and go with her. So I did. And I got in the car. I went with her to the home group meeting. I was sort of a wallflower. I was back in the back. I didn't want to be seen or heard. I just really, quite honestly, didn't even want to be there. And a guy got up to speak, and he was from North Carolina. I hadn't never seen him before. Hadn't seen him since. And as he was speaking, he paused, and he said these words. He said, there's somebody in the room today that the Lord is calling you to pastor. And he said, you're grappling with that decision. And he said, I just want you to know that I feel that the Lord would be pleased if you would step into pastoral ministry and serve Him in that way. And so I felt very clearly that was a word of the Lord for me, and so that was a catalyst to sort of take me to the next gear of pursuing this call.
Now, when did you find yourself considering coming to Gate City in the role of pastor here at First Baptist Church?
Well, you talk about full circle. You know, after pastoring at Charlotte for a period of time, after getting out of the pastorate for about 3 years, quite honestly, a little wounded, a little hurt now that I've had time to reflect on it, and going back into sales. While I was in sales, FCA came knocking again, and this time it was back in this area again through a friend of mine named Leon Willis, who was the state director, and I came back to serve Kingsport. And so we moved from Charlotte back to the Kingsport area, and as we were there, it just, you know, how God works, I became friends with Jeff DeBoard. And Jeff DeBoard is the associate pastor here at First Baptist Church. As a matter of fact, since then, our kids have married each other. My daughter Jordan is married to his son Evan. But Jeff was serving as a chaplain on the FCA board. And it was during that time that First Baptist Church of Gate City was without a pastor. And they asked if I would come and do some pulpit supply. And then from there to an interim. And from there it was clear that God wanted me to come here and be lead pastor. And that was over 10 years ago. And here I am.
Well, I know our community's benefited greatly from you being here, and I know the church has as well. People speak very, very highly of you, and I'd vouch for you as well, no doubt. Looking at the ministries you guys do here at First Baptist, I was just kind of looking over these and had looked back through them over the church's website, but why don't you walk us through a little bit about what you guys are doing now? I know you've got 2 services on Sunday morning called The Well and The Spring. Talk to us a little bit about what you guys are doing there.
Yeah, that was an interesting transition, and folks here, you know, I applaud them. You know, although it was difficult to make change, because I think change just is. So it's been nearly 3 years ago that we added a contemporary service, and that service is now at 11. It's called The Spring, which meets downstairs in our youth area. We moved the traditional service from 10:30 to 9 o'clock, and that was a stretch at first. That service has done really well, and those people are champions to have made that transition.
Yeah.
And in between, we have our Bible study, Sunday school, so 9 o'clock, the Well, 10 o'clock, the Sunday school, and then 11 o'clock, the Spring.
And on Wednesday nights, you guys have The Bridge, which is I believe your all's youth ministry.
It is youth.
Yeah.
It is youth, and then we have what we call Connect Kids.
Yeah.
And we have different ages of those. So youth are downstairs in our youth center, The Bridge, and we have children over in our Family Life Center. We have the middle school, maybe just before middle school age, over here in the very room where we're talking. And so, you know, this church has always had grace on it for children. And I mean, I speak of way before I ever came here. And I know for years we have and still do run a van ministry to go out and to reach kids in our community that wouldn't be able to get here without transportation, that are in homes that, you know, for whatever reason, they're not going to be bringing them to church. And we feed them a meal. And in addition to feed them a meal, we have an opportunity to sow into their lives regarding the reality of Jesus.
Yeah.
And we have people in our church that are now adults that are working in the van ministry because the van ministry has been so instrumental in their life. And they came to salvation because First Baptist Church of Gate City came to their house Wednesday after Wednesday after Wednesday and picked them up, or Sunday morning. And so that's a particular grace that's been on this church.
And speaking with that, you guys do a tremendous job here, and I know it kind of feeds into your background a little bit with your Upward program. It's been so successful, and I know a lot of people in this community are blessed by having that. And your all's Night to Shine, something you all have picked up the last couple of years. Talk to us a little bit about Night to Shine.
Yeah, that's such a refreshing time. Of course, that's through the Tim Tebow Foundation.
Yeah.
And, many will be familiar with it, but it's basically just a prom night for some of the kids that may not have been able to benefit from the joy of a prom night. And so for those with special needs, we invite them. They are brought by parents or a lot of times by people that work with them in whatever settings they might be in during the day. And from the time they get here to the time they leave, we roll out the red carpet. They literally enter to just applause and to total acceptance. Their shoes are shined. They are, they have gowns waiting for the girls and suits waiting for the guys, and a nice meal, the opportunity to dance to music, to have fun. And then at the end of the night, we crown kings and we crown queens. And there's hardly a dry eye in the house when
Sure.
we do that, because we're able to see the true heart of God in doing that. All of us are special needs. We're especially in need of a Savior.
True.
And Jesus came. Not because we were worthy, but because He is worthy and because He is loving. And we all had our night to shine whenever we had that opportunity to say yes to Jesus. And it's such a picture of that it just ends up being the highlight of the year.
What's your favorite part of ministry?
Well, that's really kind of changed through the years. I was thinking about that the other day. Now I would say preaching, teaching, and vision casting.
Mm-hmm.
Most folks that know me say my real lane is counseling. I love to just sit down and listen to people and then be able to respond and build prayer around what the Holy Spirit communicates to me. So right now, preaching, teaching, vision casting, counseling, and we have a wonderful pastor of pastoral care with Jeff DeBoard.
Yeah.
And so, we complement each other well in that way.
Yeah, I think so too. What do you think the hardest part of ministry is, in your opinion?
Well, 24 years doing this, not that I'm a champion, because there's plenty of folks that have been pastors for 50 years. What do they say? National average 4 to 6 years.
Yeah.
I think the opportunity, and I even alluded to the fact when I walked away for a little while because I was hurt. I was more hurt than I thought I was. So I think the hardest part is just to walk in relational purity, to walk in unconditional love, to do all of those things in the midst of not only being the church, because that might be the easiest part, but doing church.
Yeah.
Doing church becomes difficult because there are institutional dynamics that can be kind of hard to endure.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I would be pleased if it was said of me that, he was real. I don't want to be plastic. I don't have a lot of grace for plastic. But yet I know that there's a part of me that has a tendency to go there. So I'm not certainly saying that it doesn't. That he genuinely loved, and but my passion is the glory of God. I believe that real, true, authentic ministry flows out of a heart that is absolutely enamored by the reality of the living God.
Yeah.
And I want to know His glory myself, and I want to, out of that knowing, to be able to just trumpet the glory of God to others.
That's good. Yeah. All right, now for the tough stuff.
Okay.
So I wrote this down. I've been wanting to do this for a while with somebody, and I thought I'm going to test Andy Barnes, and he'll be our guinea pig. And if this flounders, you can blame me, and if it's great, we'll tell Andy that he did an awesome job. So, we got 10 questions here. They're rapid fire, so just quick answer, 1 or 2 word if we can. Some of these are spiritual. Some of these are as far from spiritual as you can get. So
Gotcha.
here we go. 10, no particular order. Favorite color?
Blue.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Favorite movie?
Saving Private Ryan, maybe Patch Adams.
Okay. Most recent book you've read?
Future Grace.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Oddest place you've ever preached?
Hot Sands of South Africa.
Okay. Favorite worship song?
Not necessarily one real contemporary, but I love He's a Good, Good Father.
Favorite candy?
Peanut M&Ms.
Beach or mountain vacation?
Beach.
One Bible character, not Jesus, that you could have one conversation with?
It would be David. And I think I would say I am so grateful that God put you in the Bible, because it reminds all of us that we don't have to be perfect people to be people after God's own heart.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. There's your top 10 from Pastor Andy Barnes. We're going to be right back with some closing announcements, so don't go anywhere. Thank you. All right, we're back with some closing announcements. We just want to remind everybody really quick, First Baptist Church, Gate City, here where Brother Barnes actually pastors, is at 307 East Jackson Street in Gate City. You can contact them through email at fbcgatecity.org. And we'd like for Pastor Andy right now to go through a little bit of information about the church and how you might be able to get in touch with them and some of the ministries they've got coming up. So Andy, why don't you let people know what you guys are up to lately?
Well, we would, just love to see you, to get to know you. We, at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, we have our traditional service in the well, followed by Bible study, Sunday school, 9:45, 10-ish. And then at 11 o'clock, the spring downstairs, which is our contemporary service. Midweek service, 6:30, youth and children's program, and Connect Kids on Wednesdays. And we do pray at 7. And so in our gathering room, we just meet to lift up the prayer concerns of the church and other prayer needs that exist. We do have coming up our upward season. It begins this Saturday, and so those games will be taking place. Night to Shine coming up in February, and I don't have that exact date on the tip of my tongue, but just know that would be coming up in February. And for the first time this Saturday evening at 6:30, we're going to do a Saturday evening service down in the spring, which will be a contemporary service. And the purpose of that service is just to have some people come and worship with us that might not get the opportunity otherwise. We've had some folks in the community just say we'd love to experience your service, love to be part of it, and love to worship with you. But we're very committed to our home church, and I understand that, and we wouldn't have it any other way.
Right.
And so this is just going to be a monthly offering that we would do one Saturday night a month, so that we can worship with the larger body of Christ in our area that would have a desire to come and have that experience with us.
And what time will that be starting this Saturday?
That will be at 6:30.
6:30. All right, tremendous. Again, you can reach out to them at fbcgatecity.org. And don't forget, here at Deeply Rooted, make sure you follow us on our Facebook page. Also, reach out to us and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, you can get all the content that we've had before. I believe this is episode 37, if I'm not mistaken. So if you've missed one before, or you'd like to go back and check another one out that you've heard previously, be sure to do so. Share that with all your family and friends and anybody in your local church that might benefit from that. So until next time, we love you. Hope you have a great week in Jesus Christ.
Deeply rooted in God's word. Deeply rooted in God.